Hey 11, this is exercise 3C on quadratic equations on page 92. Unfortunately, the recording didn't save properly, so I've had to record this in my own time. I do apologize if it's slightly different from what we learned yesterday. So the first thing we're covering is null factor theorem. The idea is that, well, we know null means 0 and factor means something we're multiplying in order to get a certain term. So the null factor theorem tells me that if I have m times n equals 0, no matter what value it is, m or n, whatever they are, they have to be, one of them has to be 0. For example, I could have 1 times 3, obviously it's going to give me a non-zero number. If I have 0.0001 times by 0.0001, that is still not going to get me 0. I need to actually have one or more of those values equaling to 0. And therefore, m equals 0 or n equals 0. So that's something that we need to note for in future use. Something else I need to note as well is that this over here is what we call the general equation or the general form of a quadratic equation. We're familiar with linear equations being y equals to mx plus c, and with that c being the y-intercept. However, it is very important to note that in linear equations, that is true. However, I need you to scrub that information from your mind because technically, that's not always true, especially for non-linear equations like a quadratic equation. So we've got our c, not always, it could be, but not always being our y-intercept. Sweet. So let's solve. We learned about factorizing earlier in the last video. So let's go through and solve this equation here. First thing I have to do is factorize using cross method. So I'm going to say, what are the two terms that are factors of x squared? We can say x and x. What are two factors of 24 that give me 11 when I add them together? I'm going to say positive 8 and positive 3. Multiply them across, I get x times positive 3 over here, giving me positive 3x. And over these two, I've got positive 8x over here. Once I've done that, I got positive 11x, and so I know that is the correct answer. I'm going to go ahead and write that in our factorized form, where I got x plus 8, bracket x plus 3 equals 0. Using our null factor theorem, I know that this right here has to equal 0, or this has to equal 0. So let's focus on this equaling to 0. 8 plus x, so x plus 8, sorry, equals to 0. I take away 8 on both sides, I get x equals to negative 8. And therefore, that is one of our answers. However, we also have this one over here. So if I do the same thing, I get x plus 3 equals to 0, x equals to negative 3. And therefore, x equals to either negative 3 or negative 8. And there are two values there. We'll talk in future about why there are two values in a quadratic equation, but let's just put it into practice for now. Over here, this is what happens when we have our a value being slightly non-zero. So we know that our generic form is this one over here, where I've got ax squared plus bx plus c, ax squared plus bx plus c, same idea. But what happens when the value of a is not 1, but in fact is 2. Same idea. What are the factors of 2x squared? I've got 2x and x. Now what two numbers multiply to give me negative 12? Well, I know 3, 4. I know 1, 12 and 2, 6. I'm going to do 3, 4. Now this is in retrospect. I know that one of these answers is correct. However, it is important that you know what the process you need to follow is, because it is going to be a lot of trial and error. It's a negative 12, so I'm going to put a negative in front of one of these. I'm going to put it over here, and then leave that one as a positive. I'm going to multiply them using my cross. So 2x times positive 4 gives me positive 8x, and then x times negative 3 gives me negative 3x. From there, I know that equals to 5x, and therefore that's correct. I'm going to use these over here. So I get 2x minus 3. X plus 4. Now it's important you don't write 2x plus 4 and x minus 3. Those give you different answers. So we get that, and remember that equals 0. So that equals 0, and I'm going to use my null factor theorem to solve for x. So over here, I'm going to ignore this first and focus on x plus 4. That gives me x equals to negative 4, because x plus 4 equals 0. Take away 4 on both sides, I get x equals to negative 4. Now I also have 2x minus 3, same idea. 2x minus 3 equals to 0. 2x, I'm going to add 3 on both sides, equals to 3. And then divide both sides by 2, gives me 3 over 2, or 1.5. I'm going to keep it as a fraction, so negative 4 equals, x equals negative 4, or 3/2. And finally, we're going to look at it in practice. What happens if I try to apply it? So the perimeter of a rectangle is 20 centimeters and its area is 24. Find the length and width of the rectangle. So formula for finding the perimeter is 2 times W plus 2 times L equals to 20. What I'm going to do is I'm going to factorize it. Instead of writing 2 times W plus 2 times L, I'm going to write 2 times W plus L. Same thing. And the area is W times L. Remember that we've got a rectangle. That might be our L, that might be our W, doesn't really matter. And that equals to 24 centimeters squared. Okay. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 2 over here. So I get W plus L equals to 20 divided by 2 is 10. I'm going to get L by itself, take away the W, so 10, take away W, gives me L. I'm going to substitute this equation right here. I'm going to substitute that there, and I end up with W times 10 take away W equals 24. So I substituted L. Instead of writing L, I write 10 take away W. Expand that, I end up with 10W minus W squared equals to 24. I'm going to rearrange that, add W squared on both sides. 10W equals to 24 plus, or should I write that the other way around? Equals to W squared plus 24. I'm going to take away 10W on both sides to get 0 equals to W squared. Take away 10W plus 24. And then I'm just going to move that 0 on the other side. Equals 0. So lovely. I've got a quadratic equation over here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to factorize it. So I know that W times W gives me W squared. And I know that 8 and 3 gives me 24. But no combination of that really gives me negative 10. So I'm going to go with 6 and 4. 6 and 4. Now, I know that they need to multiply to give me positive negative 24, but add to give negative 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make both of them negative, and then we multiply them. W times negative 4 gives me negative 4W. W times negative 6 gives me negative 6W, and they add up to negative 10W, and so I know that is correct. I'm going to write that out. So I get brackets W minus 6, bracket W minus 4 equals to 0. And from there, I know that W equals to either 4 from this equation over here, from this null factor, or 6 over here. Now we've defined our width as the shorter one, so therefore the width equals to 4 centimeters and length equals to 6 centimeters. Lovely. Let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, best of luck. Apologies for going through it so quickly.